I have rituals I treat like small acts of faith. The first is the coffee, which I always burn a little because if it's perfect I'll obsess over how to make it better and be late. This morning the mug has a nick on the rim from a move 2 apartments ago and the coffee tastes like an apology, scorched and necessary. Sophie is still curled away on her side of the bed, forehead soft against the pillow, and I make as little noise as possible because the sound of someone else breathing is the best kind of permission to keep drinking in bed for 5 more minutes. The subway is its usual chemistry experiment. Someone's perfume tries to seduce my nostrils, a man near the doors talks to a plant on his lap like it's a roommate, and the woman across from me coughs the New Yorker out through a half-lifted book. I give my usual wisecrack to the guy in the suit who always pretends to read but chants stock prices under his breath. He smiles like we're in on the same terrible joke. People are small islands trying not to sink into each other. I like being an island with a plan. The firm smells like toner and lemon cleaner by 9. The elevator ride is a performance. I smooth my jacket, practice the we should talk about promotion lines in my head, and rehearse the laugh I'll use if Elena makes me wait. 5 years of late nights, client dinners where I ate alone at the bar, and the quiet, patient accrual of work no one finds glamorous, the spreadsheets, the deck that made Old Mill Bakery look like a lifestyle brand, have a way of feeling like a single high-stakes audition. Today I tell myself I'm going to stop improvising and take what I've worked for. I walk past Harold at the front desk and nod. He nods like a man who's been asked to notice a woman only when she causes trouble, but he always has the best paperclips. The pod smells like someone microwaved fish yesterday. The printer is halfway through 2 copies of a pitch deck and a post-it trail leads from my keyboard to my chair. Rachel pops her head out of the pod and gives me that half-smile that means she won't be there for after-work drinks. I wave it off as nerves about the campaign launch. Everyone is on edge, which is a good kind of edge. The office is where my small mercies live. My phone buzzes in the pocket of my coat. The sound is a string of 2 quick notes because Sophie thinks single-tone alerts are pedestrian and makes me pay for it. I fish it out. Unknown number. A message preview, a screenshot of a thread. The kind of screenshot you only see in bad novels, where everything gets forwarded until it looks like a play. The text under the preview is 3 words, HR has this, we need to talk. I open it because the morning ritual teaches me to face things as they arrive. The screenshot is crisp on my screen. It looks exactly like messages I would write when I'm tired and careless, which is worse than looking like something I would write when sober. The punctuation is mine, the elliptical pause, the brusque second sentence. The words themselves are cold enough to make the air feel thinner. I know what the screenshot implies before I know what it contains: proximity, complicity, the kind of social evidence that gets amplified in halls and Slack channels. It would be absurd to let my stomach hitch on 3 words and a glow of pixels. I tell myself to breathe, to call Sophie, to laugh it off as a misdirect, as someone's sick joke. But there's this muscle memory of memory gaps that I own like an embarrassing scar. Late nights, a drink too many when we were pitching to a client, the fragmentary fog that comes after a full day dissolves into the evening and some parts refuse to come back. I have no bright heroic narrative for those hours, just a now and then blind spot I've learned to cover with small confessions and tighter calendars. I stare at the screenshot. I read it twice. It looks like me. Not an impersonation of my voice, but the architecture of how my sentences lean when I text at 2 a.m., a cadence Sophie has mocked in bed. There's a timestamp I don't recognize and a receiver's name that could be anyone in my phone or a new number I don't remember saving. The worst thing, absurdly, is how ordinary it looks, like a line in a long messy conversation, except that ordinary is a terrible disguise for something that can be weaponized. Nearby, someone laughs too loudly and I jump, chemical alarm in my chest. I swipe through the rest of my notifications like I'm checking the office for traps. Sophie has sent a heart emoji a minute ago and a photo of her coffee with the caption "You'll miss this, I know." I type back that I love her and then delete it because I don't want to bring this strange piece of paper into our morning. I imagine telling her later, over cereal, and the punchline always changes. I stand up and the office tilts for a fraction of a second, nothing dramatic, just a private vertigo that makes me focus on the grain of the conference table I'm about to sit at. Elena's door is closed, which in our office is meaningful in a way a locked diary is meaningful. I can feel the day rearrange itself like a deck that's been shuffled mid-game. Promotion, I tell myself, you can still take it. But the screen glows in my mind, HR has this, we need to talk. The call to action is blunt as a paperweight. Curiosity is a kind of bravery, knowing is another thing entirely. I picture being escorted out like a character in someone else's dismissal, the hallway a stage and me suddenly a prop. My phone buzzes again, a follow-up from the same unknown number, one line, no frills. Will come by during your meeting. There are words that sit on you like a bruise. I pick up my mug even though it's too hot and the coffee tastes like scorched hope. The elevator doors close, and for one weird second I feel like everything I've built is a mobile made of thread. The ride down is silent, and I realize I have no idea what this is. I only know I am about to be asked about it. The conference room is all glass and light, which is a terrible thing to be suspended in. It makes you hyper-aware of yourself, a fishbowl with decent acoustics. The table was cool under my palms. The coffee Elena had thoughtfully brought sat in a paper cup with a lipstick crescent on the rim like a smear of a confession. I told myself not to think about lipstick as evidence. I told myself not to think at all. Elena sat at my left, the same side she'd taken when I pitched brand strategies and countered Stephen Calder's offhand dismissals. She wore the office armor I knew, the warm laugh turned on like a lamp, and then, in the right light, the keen steel underneath. Today the lamp was dim. Marco Reed sat opposite me, propped by protocol. He made small notations on a tablet as if the right squiggle of ink could transubstantiate me into a box on a checklist. Maya, Elena began, like she was starting a meeting and not a verdict. Her voice had that public encourager texture, full, polished, practiced. We've received a complaint overnight alleging misconduct. We have evidence. They said the word evidence as if it were a thing that could be set down on a table next to the sugar packets. As if it could be slid across the conference table toward me and I could pick it up, examine the pixels, and go home. Show me, I said. The first thing out of my mouth was not clever or brave, it was a small, instinctive pleading, the one you use for rent, for the last marshmallow, for the truth. Marco's pen kept moving. We can't share the materials at this time, he said, clipped and even. Policy. Pending investigation. Elena's face softened for a fraction of a second, an almost apology that had nowhere to land. Maya, I don't want to do this, she said. That might have been true. It might have been stagecraft. But once HR has a complaint substantiated enough to act on, we have to suspend you pending investigation. That's standard. You have a screenshot, I said. Or a forwarded message. Somebody forwarded something to HR. Let me see it. Marco shuffled his notes. We have a copy of the complaint and accompanying screenshots. He didn't look at me when he said it. He looked at the middle distance, where corporate templates live, as if there was a PDF waiting to be signed. For confidentiality reasons, we can't show those materials to you at this time. You can't, I repeated. The mirror on the wall made my face look tired and blown out. Or you won't? Elena's fingers made the imperceptible movement she always made when she calculated political fallout. A manager is supposed to protect her reports. An ambitious one knows when to step back. There are ongoing legal considerations. We're following procedure, Maya. You're suspended pending the outcome. You should collect your things. Security will escort you. The word collect turned the conference room into a storage unit. Suddenly I was inventory, a passport, 2 notebooks, one with scribbled campaign names, one with an old receipt I kept for luck, my house keys, a faded coffee mug with a chip in the rim. I put things into a thin plastic bag that Harold from security handed me as if I'd requested dog food and not my career. I asked again. Surely someone had to choke on the script at some point. Who filed this? Who sent it? Show me the time stamp. Was it forwarded from my account? My phone? Marco looked at his tablet like it was a bomb he couldn't defuse. I can't disclose that now, he said. But the decision stands. You're suspended. You'll receive notice via email with next steps. Elena's eyes flicked to the glass, to the open office beyond where I could see my desk and the pod I'd sat in for 5 years, my nameplate, the sticky note with Sophie's last crossword clue. People looked up and looked away. A podmate stood, pretended to rearrange files. Rachel, right at the cubicle edge, slid a hand across her screen as if to make herself unreadable. You're going to run this like a criminal investigation? I asked. You're going to close the door and not let me see? It's standard, Marco interrupted. Until the complaint is resolved, we have to limit information flow. It's not standard if you won't tell me what the complaint even is, I said. I could feel a gap opening in my chest, the exact gap I had when I woke up some nights with half the night missing. I tried to account for those hours like one catalog's missing teeth. Where did they go? The difference here was that whatever had gone missing had a shape and someone else was pointing at it. Elena's mouth tightened. We have to do what's necessary to protect the company and our employees. You mean protect them from me, I said. It landed sharp and unfair. I wanted her a la laughter, the woman who'd grabbed a late-night call from me when I'd had a client meltdown. Instead I got the manager who keeps a twig of distance between herself and anything that might splinter her promotion. Harold hovered in the doorway, the flat click of his radio a metronome. He didn't reach for my arm, company policy prefers the pretense of choice, but I could tell by the way his body angled that this was an escort. People watched like the weather, curious but not invested. Sophie's name coursed through my head like something I desperately wanted to call and couldn't. Her voice was the cushion I'd relied on. I swallowed and tasted stale coffee and something metallic. Will I get paid? I asked. Marco glanced at his notes like there might be a line item. We'll follow the leave policy. Payroll will be notified. Will I be able to access my email? My phone? The questions were practical, tiny anchors. He dialed for someone who wasn't in the room. You'll be notified about access. HR will communicate next steps, Marco said. It was performance, immaculately delivered. There was no curiosity in his voice, no effort to probe the how of the thing that had just happened to me. I stood up because that is what you did when meetings ended, when verdicts were given, when you left a room that was telling you you were suddenly a story and not a person. The fluorescent lights above hummed. My shoes made an unfamiliar echo across the lobby. From somewhere in the room someone said, "We'll make sure this is handled quickly." It could have been Elena. It could have been the whole building. Promises were being handed out like napkins. As Harold tugged the door open for me, I felt the old, peculiar, guilty shame of memory gaps like a mosquito bite that never stops itching. The screenshot existed, they said. Someone had sent HR a thing that folded me up and put a docket number on my life. They refused to let me see it. They closed the file. I walked out with a plastic bag and 100,000 unanswered whys. Where did that text come from, and how did it end me? The lobby smelled like burnt coffee and old hand sanitizer, a smell that somehow made everything feel more official and less human. I hugged the cardboard box of office detritus to my chest like a consolation prize, a travel coffee mug with world's okayest marketer stamped in a chipper font, a small succulent whose name I never learned, a stack of client decks with the corners bent from too many late nights. Elena had said, in the meeting room, that this would be temporary. Marco had said, perfectly clipped, that we needed to preserve investigative integrity. Harold the security guard watched me shuffle past with the kind of look older men reserve for hurricanes and X's, the look of someone who has seen a building explode on the news and already chosen which windows to blame. Nobody looked at me. The receptionist, who used to sing off-key to herself while stapling, looked at the floor and made a show of balancing a pen on its cap. Rachel's desk was empty, her mug sat there with lipstick on the rim and no one at the sink, no one to laugh about how the Keurig was on strike again. My inbox was a small riot on my phone, an automated HR confirmation, an IT security lockout notice, a calendar invite marked meeting, do not accept, and a line of Slack pings that were all the same color gray, muted, except for the way my name kept popping up in other people's threads. I tried to make a joke to the guy carrying the mail sacks, something about being escorted during the prom, but my mouth kept landing on the wrong syllables. My head still hummed with the metallic aftertaste of Elena's "we can discuss this later" and Marco's practiced expression of detached sympathy. I'd been 5 years at this firm. I'd shown up early, stayed late, brought pastries on Fridays during launch weeks. I had a collection of micro-rituals: the third-floor balcony breath, the burnt coffee at 3 p.m., the subway joke about always missing the 6:24 because I was still debugging a deck. All those small things felt like a dress I'd been politely unzipped out of while a room full of people watched. On the sidewalk I tried the number that had texted me the screenshot. The first call went straight to voicemail, a tinny, pre-recorded greeting that might as well have been a threat wrapped in hold music. "I left my name because you always leave your name. It's a weird human pettiness that you insist you exist to complete strangers' mechanical prompts." The machine swallowed it and the beep came back with an echo. I called the unknown sender next, the one that had sent the image, and the same hush answered. No person, no raggedy hang-up, just a void and then the small, final click. When I unlocked my phone again, there it was, a forwarded screenshot thread that had arrived before I could even step out of the building. The app had flagged my first and last name, the highlight looked official, the kind of boldface that makes things feel inevitable. The screenshot was a cropped section of a message thread, a client-based color scheme I recognized, with one line in particular already doing most of the damage, a short, plain sentence that would be easy to misread in the worst way if you squinted at it and preferred to. My hands shook enough that the coffee I'd bought, attempt at normalcy, sloshed and burnt the ridge of skin near my wrist. I didn't remember sending the message. My memory had 3 holes in it that afternoon, like missing tiles, a bartender's laugh, a flicker of streets, my keys falling into a drain. The place where the message should have been was a soft, ugly blank. People had started passing it around. Somebody in marketing forwarded it into the hashtag general channel with a thread of comments that were all the same color of small, efficient moral rumor, shocked emojis, a quick "oh no," a tag of Elena's name, a gif of someone fainting for comedic punctuation. A private message pinged from someone I'd once covered for on Half Day Friday, everybody saw. Texts from friends came like cautious inquiries. "Are you okay? Do you need a ride? Call me." Sophie called twice and then the second call went to voicemail. I listened to a message of her voice, breathy with fear. I wanted to call her back and say the word that would fix everything, not guilty, not innocent, just fix, but my mouth knew only the taste of adrenaline and regret. Harold watched me while I scrolled, and in his face I read something I haven't been good at reading in myself, the look of people deciding who to believe. It wasn't malicious exactly. It had the economy of someone who has worked nights and seen the rumor mill make people disappear in the same building more than once. He tilted his chin toward the revolving doors as if to say, they already have their story, why argue with the first draft? I called Benny from my contact list because calling HR felt like waving a white flag. Benny's ringtone had the familiar crackle of our childhood summers, his voice answer was quick and soft, a life raft. He told me, in 2 sentences, that company phones were locked, that he couldn't pull logs without permission, that rules were rules. I told him the message refused to load on my end and that the screenshot people were circulating didn't make sense. He swore quietly and promised to poke the IT console as soon as he could. I heard him mutter a technical word or two that could have been the name of an animal and then, "I'll call you from my personal phone." No promises. The thing about being framed, if that's the right word for the sensation, is how quickly your own sense of time retracts. The last normal minute you can remember becomes precious, a grain of sanity you clutch so tightly it pricks the skin. Mine was the smell of burnt coffee in the break room and the image of Sophie laughing over pizza last week, her forehead crinkled when she called me a workaholic cyborg. Those memories felt like proof that my life had been constructed in ordinary places, not in between screenshot boxes. In the flutter of my notifications, another name popped up, Nora Vance. The local blogger. Hungry. I stared at the preview statement and felt the room narrow. Whoever hit send on that thing had timed it to the hour when everyone in the building drank their last irresponsible sips and filed out convinced they'd seen the truth. I hadn't even left the steps of the building and people were already editing my story. Every forward voice clipped a corner, making me smaller, making me the shape of whatever was easiest to condemn. My phone buzzed again and, this time, the message was a single line in a gray bubble from a number I didn't recognize: "Don't dig." My thumb hovered over the reply key. I could type back, "Who are you?" Or, "What message?" Or, "Who paid Tess?" Instead my brain supplied the memory it didn't have, the one that might matter most, where I had walked that night, the bar lights, the subway, a piece of street I couldn't put my foot on. The investigation was already moving faster than I was allowed to think. Someone, somewhere, was already choosing which version of me would survive the morning. I was still trying to remember which one I was. I sit at Sophie's kitchen table with a mug of coffee that tastes like someone burned the future, acrid, steady, the kind of thing you drink because caffeine is legal and denial is not. My phone is splayed face up between my palms, like a thing I'm trying to read the temperature of. The whole day has been a looped recording in my head, Elena's smile cutting off like a tape, Marco reciting HR speak like prayer, Harold's eyes on mine as if they were cataloging what to say in a report. Now the work is smaller, interminably domestic, put the night under a microscope and find the worm. I start at the beginning because that's how my brain likes to lie to me, linear, neat. Drinks with Rachel, because work spills into wine like it always has. We met at that place on 9th, the bar with the sad ferns and the bartender who pretends he doesn't notice how you survive your 30s. I remember the cold glass sweating in my hand, the playlist floating from indie acoustic to something with a horn section that made the table lean in. I remember saying, half joking, if they make me present that deck again I will start the slideshow with a gif of a cat in a suit. Rachel laughed too hard, spilled a little red wine on her sleeve, and I told her not to worry, I could fix the slides on the way in the morning. That was the gist, usual overworked jokes, less than usual swagger. I remember because it feels like a scratch on a record I can play again. We left the bar too late, midnight plus, and the city smelled like its tired self, fry oil, wet paper, a subway joke about us getting home before the rats took the one train. The walk was sloppy in the way of people who've decided to avoid a cab drama and choose cold air instead. I remember, the streetlight humming over my head, my coat collar up against a wind that talked to my ears, the way the crosswalk made a tiny staccato under my feet. I remember texting Sophie while the light was red, sending clipped lines about the client meeting, they want the funnel dead on, no frou-frou, and a photo of my shoe with ketchup in the background because I thought it would make her laugh. She sent 3 laughing heart emojis and "You're the world's most dramatic associate." That exchange sits in my chest like a warm coin. But when I call up the Messages app, the timeline is not the warm coin, it's a slideshow with a few frames missing. There are places where the conversation seems to skip, like a scratched DVD. My texts to Sophie cascade in order for the earlier evening, 10:12 p.m., a joke about client PowerPoint, 11:48 p.m., a "see you tomorrow" with a heart. Then there's a block of system timestamps that read oddly, delivered times that do not line up with my memory, bubbles that say sent at weird hours, and between 2 perfectly legible messages, a single sent entry that is a gray bar with no preview. No text, no photo thumbnail, the way a healed wound is covered with tape so you can't peek. I tap it because what else do you do, but the tap does nothing. The app spins, the little loading wheel like a bored fly, then gives up and returns me to the conversation. I try swiping, I try force stopping the app. I pull the phone closer to my face and I can see the pixels holding their breath. Everything else loads instantly, Sophie's last 3 messages, the meme from my sister, even a group chat where everyone told me to stop being dramatic about the client slides. But that 1 cent bubble is stubbornly opaque, like someone sealed it with wax. There's a timestamp under it, 12:03 a.m. My memory puts me in the crosswalk at 12:30. I don't black out, I don't have those epic "I woke up in a grocery cart" stories. My drinking is a precise, shameful thing, a beer too many sometimes, an extra glass at dinners where the conversation is sharp and I want blur. I am occasionally fuzzy, but not erased. Not like this. Every finger on Sophie's name puts the little bar through the same ritual: load, refuse, return. I think of the screenshot Marco said HR had. I think of Marco's clipped voice telling me they had evidence. I think of Elena's hand on my elbow that morning, firm and polite. I think about how plausible it is that there's a message that could end a career, and that plausible is a knife I don't want to touch. I scroll through sent messages, searching like a woman hunting for a dropped knife in the dark. My thumbs are clean, a little shaky. There's the gif I sent Rachel of a cat in a tie, there's a quick love you to Sophie at 11:49 p.m., there's my mother's request to bring casserole Sunday. Then the blank entry, sitting between the gif and the love you, the wound between two ordinary things. I press it again and feel a small, ridiculous hope like static. Maybe it's a glitch. Maybe it's a file that didn't finish downloading. Maybe. I call my voicemail because sometimes the universe likes to hide things in old-fashioned places. The recording is brief, corporate, just the usual, you have no new messages. Nothing from that night. The number associated with the blank message is my own name, but my phone thinks of it like a stranger, unsent, undelivered, as if someone else is holding the envelope. I try to replay the visuals of the walk home, the busker playing a far too bright trumpet, the way a woman in a red coat kept pace with me 2 blocks and then dropped back, like they're strips of film I can reframe and examine. They're all there. The message is the only hole. I can live with gaps in memory when they're my own doing. I can apologize to Sophie for staying out, buy both of us overly expensive bagels to atone. What I can't digest is the idea that I'm not just forgetful tonight. That someone else might have taken the piece that fits into the blank. That the wound is not healing, it's been stitched over. My hands know how to hold a phone and how to crack an Excel formula and how to make a late-night PowerPoint look like the apocalypse is averted. They do not know how to find something that has been made invisible on purpose. I tap the blank one more time. The app stares back like a patient who knows a secret. Outside the window, a siren files distant and then is gone. I say Sophie's name into the quiet and the word hits the room like a small, fragile searchlight. Somebody stitched a secret into my night. And they left the thread hanging. The security badge on my lanyard clicked like a guilty metronome. Harold opened the door without looking up. His face is the same anonymous cinder block of an expression he's had for 8 years, which is to say neutral enough that it reads as its own kind of accompaniment to bad news. The bullpen smelled like reheated sadness, microwave egg, someone's cheap cologne, the faint, bitter echo of burnt coffee 2 days old. Fluorescent lights hummed in a way that made everything feel slightly accusatory. I packed slowly because I could. It's what I've always done, enough time to curate the impression of calm. Inside the box went the small terracotta plant my mom gave me when I made senior associate, a mug with, "World's okay boss," printed in a sarcastic font I bought as a joke, 3 pens that never quite worked, the framed note Sophie left me on my desk that said, "You got this," in my handwriting from a late night when we'd both been too tired to argue. I folded my blazer over my arm like a shield. People looked up when I walked by, a flicker of recognition, then a carefully applied flattening of expression. Rachel, my podmate, was the one who gave me the first full face. For 5 years she'd been the barometer of office mood. If Rachel smiled, the rest of the floor followed. Today she had a small, tight smile that might have been real if I hadn't worn that same smile back at budget meetings. She wore the look people wear when they don't want to be photographed, tilted chin, eyes briefly apologetic, mouth rehearsed. She stood, made the 2-step toward me that's always meant I'm leaving you the social space, but she stopped 2 feet away like the invisible line was electrified. "Maya," she said, which was to say hello, or maybe it was the acknowledgement of a criminal. She stopped. She glanced at Harold, who was pretending to check a clipboard, because Harold is a human noise machine in these situations, his presence is a neutralizer. "I'm so sorry," Rachel finished. The words were the kind people were issued in their handbook, concise, low risk, devoid of detail. They weren't meant to console so much as to absolve. "Thanks." My voice came out wanting. I asked the obvious thing because it was the only thing that mattered. "What did you see? Who sent it to HR?" She blinked, as if the question required a longer search through her memory than she'd been allotted. Her mouth made a small, peculiar shape that told me she had an answer she'd been hired to withhold. "It's on a private thread," she whispered finally, head dipped. A group chat. It was shared. Everybody saw it. Those words landed like a hand on the back of my neck. Everybody? I asked, trying to make my voice casual, a subway joke I couldn't quite shape. Everybody like the whole floor, or everybody like the people who matter? She didn't meet my eyes. They posted it. It was everywhere for like, she swallowed. It was everywhere. I could feel the office contracting around us. Laptops were down for survival, conversations reduced to pre-approved phrases. I wandered the rows like someone reading a crime scene for clues in the margins. At Karen's desk her phone lay face down, as if privacy were a tactile object you could armor yourself with. Ben's chair was empty, the monitor that usually streamed 6 ticket windows now showed a paused spreadsheet titled Q3 Projections, as if nothing else dared to happen on his watch. A few people gave me that tight, practice condolences cadence. I'm so sorry this is happening / if there's anything I can do / hope you're okay, the corporate chorus that says support while making sure no one volunteers actual support. I learned to read the degrees of commitment in these things, the length of eye contact, the warmth level in their mouths, the angle of shoulder when they pivoted away. Too many were just going through the motions. A couple of faces were blank, polished, almost gleeful in their measured distance. Those were the dangerous ones, the people who have already shifted their loyalties to whatever keeps the latter from trembling. I caught a flash of a phone screen as someone slid it into their bag, a half-second glimpse of a Slack thread title, Private Leadership Group, that wasn't for me to see. My throat tightened. Which chat? I demanded, softer now, because asking louder would make it official, would make me the person who won't stop asking. No one's telling anyone anything, whispered James from accounting, who always balanced expense reports like he was balancing his moral ledger. He said it like a man delivering bad weather. It's meant to be that way. Keeps the fallout contained. And who decided that? I asked. The question was simple, and not simple. It wasn't about curiosity, it was about where the force had been applied, the point of origin for this slow, collective sidestep. It's just, better that everyone knows but nobody talks, he said, eyes flicking toward a cluster of senior cubes where the silhouettes of people in suits sat like sharks. You know how politics gets. I did know. I knew it in the way my hands remembered the feeling of a promotion falling through like a stage dropping a floor you meant to step on. I knew it in the grind of my own months-long pitch for the role that was suddenly, inconveniently, empty. Someone else, an older woman from legal who always smelled faintly of peppermint gum, lowered her voice to a conspiratorial hush as she pushed a stack of papers across her desk. We saw the screenshot, she said. It's graphic. Not helpful. Not at all. Her eyes were watery in the way that said she didn't want to file that memory under work. But it's out there, she added. And they have it. The pronoun, they, felt like a box around a small, efficient machine designed to make storms look like accidents. Silence started to thicken around me, not empty but intentional, like a well-constructed non-response. It isn't just that people were avoiding me. They were refusing to be witnesses in a room charged with a different kind of electricity. The louder the silence, the clearer the message. Discovery here would be costly to someone, and that someone had friends. I left with a box and a receipt for my badge being deactivated. Harold walked me to the elevator like a man escorting a package flagged delicate. The doors closed, compressing the air into something tighter than it ought to be. I had a single, urgent thought that felt electric and small. Find the private chat. Whoever posted it had made a decision to weaponize a fragment of my life. Whoever shared it without comment had decided collateral damage was acceptable. I tucked the edge of my mug into my blazer pocket so the picture of the sarcastic boss would face out like a tiny flag, and stepped into the lobby where the receptionist smiled the official smile that has nothing to do with warmth. As the revolving doors turned, my phone buzzed in my hand. I glanced down without meaning to, and the caller ID was Nora Vance, local blog, hungry for a sound bite. I didn't answer. I let the call sink into voicemail like a stone. But I couldn't let the private chat sink. I couldn't let that deliberate, spreading silence stand as truth. I pressed my thumb to the screen and told myself, for the 100th time since morning, that I would make someone talk. I sat on the edge of Benny's desk like a spectator at a bad magic show, watching his fingers hover over the keyboard as if the right chord would untangle everything. The office smelled like burnt coffee and printer toner, the newsroom of our boutique firm condensed into a cubicle farm where petty rivalries fermented into policy. Benny wore the same hoodie he'd worn to my 10th birthday party. Seeing it now anchored me to the less clinical fact that he was my friend first, IT guy second. "Please," I said, and the single word came out thin. I tried humor after, "I'll give you the good subway joke," but it deflated before it left my mouth. He looked at me with the kind of pity you only ever get from people who once scraped gum off your sneaker. "Company won't authorize a deep dive," he said. It wasn't a refusal so much as a recitation. Marco had done his job, so had Elena. Benny had the exact paragraphs of the corporate script memorized. Without an official complaint on file, I can check what I'm allowed to check. I can't pull access logs, I can't query server-side message metadata. You know that. I did know it. I knew the forms, the silent hierarchies, the way political interests created blind spots that convenient accusations slid right through. I also knew how useless telling that aloud sounded, which is why I started rummaging through my own devices while he made the authorized micro-investigations that read like the company's approved grieving. My phone behaved like a pet that had been scolded. The message wouldn't load, just a blank grayed-out bubble marked with a little spinner, as if the conversation had been politely asked to forget what happened. There were gaps in my messaging history I'd never seen before, like the conversation had been edited by an absent-minded novelist. Deleted messages, hidden threads, occasional last-seen indicators that blinked on and off at different hours than I remembered. My fingers trembled and I blamed the late coffee. Benny hooked me up to a portable drive and said low things about dispute escalations and the likely politics of requesting logs. He promised to keep poking at the edges he was allowed to poke at, mail routing headers, email receipts, the kind of breadcrumbs that HR leaves when they think they're covering a trail. He also said the part one already feared, if this was internal, a higher-level order could erase traces, archive folders, and the rest of the corporate archaeology we depend on for justice. So I did the embarrassing, vulnerable thing and called in an outsider. Armin showed up like someone who'd stepped out of a noir podcast, short hair, blunt jacket, no nonsense. He introduced himself with the stupid nickname he'd chosen for himself, Phone Whisperer. I wanted to roll my eyes. Instead I handed him a mug with cold coffee and watched him take over my kitchen island like it was operating theater. He didn't care about company memos. He wanted raw input, SIM card dumps, device backups, MAC addresses, last known IPs. He plugged my phone into his laptop and breathed like someone inhaling the first good cup of coffee in a week. He had a small, military precision set of software that whistled through files, reconstructing things my human eyes couldn't. "You okay with me pulling deleted stuff?" he asked. He was not coy about the ethics, he liked that I asked the question at all. Yes. Yes, do it. There's a sick little exhilaration to watching someone pull a ghost out of a machine. It's part archaeology, part necromancy. He worked quickly, murmuring the names of files like incantations. Deleted messages reassembled themselves as if stitched out of rumor, time stamps, message IDs, device tokens. He said things I didn't know the names for, mirrored session IDs, ephemeral device tokens, SMS headers that betrayed their origins. He spoke fast enough that sometimes I had to ask him to say it again. At first, the results looked like more dead ends. An IP here, a truncated header there, a relay server in a jurisdiction that laughed at subpoenas. Then his face changed in a way that didn't suit him, something like a small, delighted horror. "Look," he said, pushing the laptop toward me. The screen filled with a list of log entries, each a thin vertical slice of my life. There was my account ID, my profile name, a session token associated with what our apps call a mirrored account, essentially, a copy of the device that can send and receive as if it were me. The session had been initiated at 2:12 a.m. My stomach dunked. 2:12 a.m. was a notch in my scattershot memory, an hour I might have been home, might have been hung over on the couch, might have texted Sophie a gif and fallen asleep mid-swipe. In my head that time belonged to a forgettable blur. On the screen it was precise and accusing. "What's the device?" I asked, my voice small. He highlighted an entry. "Not your phone. That token belongs to a device that authenticated using a SIM. The sender number is your number, it's spoofed, or mirrored, but the SIM used for authentication was registered to a burner. Telco gave me last known tower pings 3 months back." He tapped and another map bloomed, grainy and polite. A blue dot pulsed where it shouldn't have. "This is 2 blocks from your office. Cafe on 3rd and Marlowe. You haven't been there in months." I blinked. A cafe. The kind of place I would linger in when I needed a block of time to write a deck or vanish into a notebook. I hadn't been there in months because October had been for pitches, November for client dinners, December for the slow, corporate consumption of my free time. The dot stayed on the screen like an accusation. "Burner SIM traces to a purchase within the neighborhood," Armand said. "Bought in person, activated, used to authenticate to a mirrored session at 2:12 a.m. The message that landed in HR's hands, header shows it was sent via that mirrored session. It used your number as the from. So someone bought a phone. Sat in a cafe 2 blocks from our office at 2 in the morning. Used a mirrored account to send a message as me." I tried to make it sound like a theory and not a worldview collapse. "Yes." Armand's voice was flat, but there was a corner of triumph in it, like he'd found a needle in an impossible haystack. "And they didn't use a VPN. They left an IP trail to a public Wi-Fi at the cafe. The MAC was scrubbed later, but the session ID lasted long enough. Of course they didn't scrub everything. Shame and incompetence like this go hand in hand. Whoever had orchestrated it, whoever wanted me gone, had left a breadcrumb in plain sight." The kitchen flickered with lamplight. Benny, who'd wandered back in and listened from the doorway, made a noise that was half swear, half relief. My phone sat between us like a mute witness. I should have felt vindicated. Instead I felt a cold, precise worry thread through me. Proximity is not the same as identity. Someone had used my number, and someone had been 2 blocks from my office at 2:12 a.m. The math added up to a different, darker sentence. It was local. Armand leaned back. "You need to know," he said. "Whoever did this knows where to buy a SIM. They know how to set up mirrored sessions. They're careless in small ways, which makes them dangerous in big ways. If they're willing to plant this much, they'll escalate." Outside, the world kept being sleepy and pedestrian. Inside, the laptop hummed like a beehive. My head buzzed with possibilities I didn't want to entertain. I had a list of suspects that could fill a resignation letter. "Where do we go from here?" Benny asked, practical as ever. Armand closed his laptop like a book. "We trace purchases, we get CCTV from the cafe, we map credit card trails, if anyone used a card. And you," he said, looking at me, "you figure out who needed you out of the way." I swallowed. The calendar on my phone said I had 3 days before HR's deadline to recommend termination or reinstate me. I thought of Sophie's face the night before, and Tessa's tearful "I was paid to forward," and the thin, replicating smear across our internal chat. My mouth felt dry. The screen still showed a token with a timestamp, 2:12 a.m. A mirrored account that spoke in my voice. A burner SIM that pinged off a tower 2 blocks from my office. I hadn't been to that cafe in months. Yet someone used my number from there in the dead of night. I realized, with a clarity that was almost clinical, that someone had planted a version of me where I could not possibly have been, and the version had gotten what it wanted. The laptop breathed softly. The blue dot on the map pulsed once, steady as a heart monitor. Then my phone vibrated in my pocket with an unknown number. I didn't need to look to know it would be nothing and everything. The pod smelled like burnt coffee and printer dust, like it always did when the sun hit the east windows and everyone pretended the HVAC was a civic miracle. My old chair, where I had learned to wedge my knee against the desk to stay awake through client decks, was taken. Rachel was there instead, headphones off, eyes on me like I'd asked for directions to an exit I didn't remember agreeing to. I shouldered my bag like I was still bringing in a laptop for a presentation. The motion felt ceremonial. "Rachel," I said. The name landed between us like a file sliding into place. I said it soft, because I wanted to see how she'd hold it. She blinked, then smiled in that way that had once been the kind you could get away with when you were running low on caffeine and high on empathy. That smile curdled faster than I expected. "Maya," she said, too bright. Are you okay?" I laughed, because my voice was trying to be light and my ribs were doing the thing they do when panic laces itself through a sentence. "No," I said. "Not really. Which is why I'm asking. Did you send anything to HR last night?" "Anything? An email, a screenshot, a message? Point blank, did you send anything about me?" She straightened as if someone had whispered the word policy into the room. For a second she looked genuinely startled, like I'd thrown water on a plant that had thought it was fine on neglect. Then she folded into defense, the professional reflex where people cross their arms and become smaller to look less complicit. "What, Maya, why would I?" She cut herself off. Her words came clipped, rehearsed. "I forwarded something this morning. Somebody sent it to me and I forwarded it. That's it." "You forwarded it to HR?" I asked. No pretense now. I asked like I was ordering a coffee, black, no nonsense. She chewed on the inside of her cheek. "To a group. It was meant to get eyes on it." "You mean, HR's eyes?" I felt my jaw tighten. There's a particular clarity to anger when you can't remember whether the thing you're angry about is real or gaslit by your own fuzzy night. I'm not proud of that. My memory has a habit of blurting out at inconvenient times, but I had the screenshot, I had the forwarded thread, and every downward glance my phone gave when I tried to open the original message. Those were facts. The rest was fog I was steadily trying to map. Rachel's hands were busy with a pen now, twisting it like a thin batten. "Look," she said, and the look was less conciliatory and more like a hand wave designed to seal the conversation. "I didn't make anything up. I didn't change the attachment. I didn't. You always make this about you." It was meant to hurt. She wanted me to recoil. It didn't. It only made my chest pull tighter. "You forwarded a message about me to people who decide whether I have a job," I said. She opened her mouth and closed it, which felt crueler than a single sharp answer. "Everyone is freaking out," she said finally. And I thought, someone just wanted to make sure HR saw it. It was the thinnest, most corporate shrug I've ever been offered. Someone just wanted to make sure HR saw it. The grammar was a kind of legal insulation. Nobody claims responsibility. Responsibility becomes a natural disaster. I tried to read her face for anything like regret. There was an economy to her expression, no waste, no extra muscle movement. Something had paid her to look away. "You could have told me," I said. "If you were only forwarding, you could have told me. I asked you to be honest." She finally looked at me properly. The warmth I had once mistaken for friendship had been filed into a folder labeled Workplace Rapport, and then stamped Sensitive. "Maya," she said quietly, like she was explaining the weather, "you always knew the higher-ups wouldn't protect you." The sentence landed like a verdict. It didn't shout so much as it unlatched a door I hadn't known was stuck. For a second all the fluorescent light in the pod went metallic. I could hear the copier beep 3 times in a row, like a metronome keeping time for a life I was just being asked to step out of. "You think they want me out," I said. It was more of a statement than a question. I could see her thinking through the angles. Who gets what if I'm off the board for promotion? Who gets to steer accounts I had been courting? Stephen's name hovered unspoken in the air like a ghost elevator playing for 2 floors above us. Rachel shrugged, the movement abrupt and empty. "I don't know who got paid or who got asked. I just know who I report to. And when something like that lands in your inbox," she tapped her screen, a tiny click that sounded like a lock turning, "you forward it. Policies. Paper trails. Self-preservation. Self-preservation, I echoed, because the word felt like an accusation and a confession all at once. At my expense. She hesitated, then slid something small across the desk, a screenshot from her phone. It was the same blurred image that had been making the rounds in the office Slack, that rotten little thing you couldn't open without your browser telling you no. She didn't meet my eyes as she did it. You should go, she said suddenly. You look like you're about to make a scene. I asked you a question, I said. The sentence was softer than I meant. Maybe because I'd been taught to believe that people would look out for each other. Maybe because I wanted to give her something to return. Or because the parts of me I'd buried under deadlines and late nights wanted to hope this was a misunderstanding that could be corrected with caffeine and clarity. Rachel's eyes were small and bright now, hard as battery cells. We're all just trying to survive, Maya, she said. Then, lower, like a blade folded into a boot, you always knew the higher-ups wouldn't protect you. She stood up as if she had a meeting, an appointment with the future I'd been exiled from, and put her headphones on, the cord a barrier. I sat there with my bag heavy on my knee, the pod suddenly a foreign country. The screenshot on the desk hummed like a dead thing. Who benefits from my disappearance? The question had been rhetorical until her last sentence. Now it was an engine. I reached for my phone to call someone, Ben, Armin, Sophie, but my hands felt full of glass. My memory didn't give me the night back, but it gave me enough, a set of motives, a pattern, a list of names. The list was short. The stakes were not. I closed my hand around the phone and felt it vibrate, not a call, just a new email. Priya's office smelled like lemon sanitizer and old paper, which in a way made the conversation feel official and antiseptic, exactly the frame they wanted me to see my mess through. She sat back in the leather chair like she'd sat back in the leather chairs of a dozen people who hadn't yet realized losing sometimes costs less than winning. I had my jacket off, my hands warm from holding my own coffee for too long. It tasted like I'd burned it on purpose, so I had something to blame other than nerves. Walk me through everything, she said, which I did, the parts one could remember in order and the parts one couldn't in a kind of cautious circular motion. The late drinks. The walk home. The gaps. The screenshot that wouldn't load. Tessa's tearful confession. Armin's logs. Benny's hands shaking around the company firewall. How Elena said nothing but we need to talk and Marco recited a script like he'd been taught to replace the sound of a human voice. Priya didn't laugh when I mentioned Stephen Calder. She didn't have to. Her face did the math for her, promotion paths, power plays, and the smell of opportunity when someone's reputation went up in smoke. Then she started talking about playbooks. Corporations have a 3-step defense, she said. 1. Isolate the narrative. 2. Control the pace. 3. Bury cost. She used the words like a surgeon. Isolate the narrative by calling it an ongoing personnel matter and by restricting who sees the evidence. Pace. Drag the timeline so the person under investigation runs out of money, patience, time. Cost. Offer a settlement with an NDA that's cheaper than the litigation they fear. I asked about evidence, about Armin's finding that a burner SIM pinged near the office at 2:12 a.m., about mirrored accounts, about metadata that didn't lie. Priya nodded when I said it, then did that pragmatic lawyer thing where she pulled the smile out of the answer. Good evidence helps, but it's not decisive in and of itself. Technical logs are messy, timestamps can be wrong, IP addresses proxied, devices routed. If the company wants to, they'll say the logs are inconclusive, or that releasing them would violate privacy of other employees or clients. Hearsay, Tess saying she was paid, great for the moral narrative, not always enough to pass a discovery threshold without corroboration. And remember, they can assert privilege for certain communications and withhold them. She explained discovery like it was both a tool and a trap. I could demand it, file suit, demand the internal emails, the screenshots, the logs. The courtroom process would pry open everything, force production. But discovery costs. Depositions. Expert witnesses to authenticate digital traces. A battle of forensics. A law firm minefield that eats retainer checks and time. If you file suit to compel discovery, you should expect to spend serious money. We're not talking about a weekend and small claims. We're talking about months, possibly years. You can win the discovery fight and still lose the narrative in the press. Even if in 10 months a judge orders production and it proves your phone was spoofed, the press release, the LinkedIn comments, the whispering in the lunchroom, that damage has been done. She slid a folder across the desk toward me. Inside were 3 options, neatly tabbed: demand discovery, litigate, file suit, defamation, wrongful termination, tortious interference, depending, or settle, hush, severance, NDA. Option 1 meant suing to force the company's hand. Option 2 meant going public with a lawsuit that might brand me as combative. Option 3 meant money up front, confidentiality in perpetuity, and the company closing the matter. Priya's cue phrases were dry as toast but landed harder than the coffee. They'll offer you a seam to stitch your life back without the theatrics. They'll ask you to sign an NDA and a release. They will emphasize the convenience. I asked the line I knew I'd ask before I walked in: is it worth it? If I vindicate myself, if we can prove someone framed me, what does victory even look like? Priya's eyes held mine in a way that warned me she was about to remove the band-aid. Victory costs. And sometimes the cost is more than what you're trying to get back. She tapped the table with a short fingernail. To win, you need to be willing to litigate hard. You need the funds, the stamina, and, this is the important part, the appetite for the collateral consequences. Litigation brings documents into the public record. Depositions get used by media. Opposing counsel will try to drag up everything: your late nights, your text histories, gaps in your memory. If there's anything you're embarrassed about, frankly, anything at all, they'll use it. She used the word stamina like it was a physical currency. I thought of my rent due, of payroll interruptions we'd seen at the firm the month before, of the bank freeze she'd mentioned as a possibility if an investigation morphed into something else. I thought of Sophie sitting by the window, pretending to read, her jaw clenched when she thought I couldn't see. I thought of the threat text Tess had slid to me: don't dig or they'll come for you next, and how a lawsuit would make me the single most interesting ongoing target the firm could use to discourage copycats. We can fight, Priya said. We can try to force discovery. We can go scorched earth. But a lot of what you're fighting is narrative and timing. They've already shaped the story in-house and to people who matter: clients, some media, and your colleagues. Reversing that takes time, and time is the thing people will use against you. How about a public clearing? I asked, voice thinner than I'd intended. We go to Nora Vance. We put everything on record. Make it impossible for them to gaslight this. That's a different war, Priya said. If you go public before you secure the evidence you need, you hand them the frame, a disgruntled employee crying conspiracy. If you go public with evidence in hand, you've probably already spent enough to make a settlement look very appealing. And remember, even if you get a judgment later, enforcement and collecting damages, if the company is clever, gets messy. She slid a second piece of paper across the folder: short-term triage. Preserve everything. Write down everything you remember, even the fragments. No social media. Don't talk to the press without counsel. Send a preservation letter. And, her voice went quieter, be careful because there are threats now. If anyone hints at physical danger, you call the police. If it escalates, we get a restraining order. We can't litigate away a bullet. I laughed then, short, brittle, because it came out like the kind of dark subway joke I'd told after hours. Priya didn't laugh. She had the kind of face that assessed the situation like a balance sheet and then tabulated the human cost. Finally she leaned forward. You have leverage: Armin's logs, Tessa's admission, the mismatch in the screenshots. Worth something in negotiation. We can file for discovery to force their hand, or we can show them the file and negotiate a severance that keeps the worst of the optics off your name. But know this, the company's already told a version of the story inside and outside. That's why they're comfortable offering settlements that include non-disparagement. They're buying silence because silence keeps the story manageable. When you put it like that, I said, because I needed to hear it from someone else. What you're really saying is, winning in court doesn't necessarily get my life back. Priya's smile was small and merciless. Winning in court might get you vindication. It might not get you your old job, your promotion, or the friends who already closed ranks. And financially, it could bankrupt you while they take a reputational scab and move on. Outside the window the city hummed against the fall, someone's bike bell, a truck backfiring. Inside, my phone buzzed on the table like a small animal. I flinched. Priya didn't look surprised. She said, quietly, "They want you to decide quickly." That's the point. My thumb hovered over the screen. The message preview read only a few hours left. We should talk. The apartment was the same as it always was but smaller, like the city had tightened its belt and stolen a few square feet. The kettle clicked, the coffee burned because I forgot it, again. Habit kept my hands moving, clearing the countertop, lining up the mail, checking the 2x4 of receipts I could still make sense of. Rituals are supposed to be anchors, but that morning they felt like props in someone else's play. My phone hand sprang with a set of calls that I let go to voicemail because I knew what the first one would be, the motherly cadence, the pause before the question I wasn't ready to answer. My father left a quieter message than I expected, voice sort of breaking on the end. "Is it true they suspended you?" We saw some of it online. Some of it online is what adults said when they were trying to be gentle and failing. My mother followed with an exhalation of 1,000 what happened s. I listened to their worry and felt that peculiar, shame-tinged heat that lives in the back of my throat when you can't fix things for the people who fixed you. Sophie called while I was still pressing down the kettle lid. She didn't say her name for the first 30 seconds, she made a small noise like someone weighing words. She began, and I could hear that she'd been crying or had been trying not to. She said she needed space. She said she loved me, but then added, "I'm scared, Maya. I don't know what to do." There was the soft rustle of the other side of the city, maybe her jacket, maybe a protest she'd seen on the news, and then, quietly, "Not tonight." I listened to the click of the line. "Not tonight" is not a sentence I can bear to parse anymore. Its grammar shaped into distance. I stared at the sofa where Sophie's scarf had been, at the dent in the cushion where she read. The apartment suddenly felt like a stage set one stagehand had accidentally taken a sledgehammer to. There were texts from coworkers that looked like people trying to be kind but failing at it with corporate efficiency. "Thinking of you. If you need anything, hope everything's okay." They had the same polite distance as the Friday emails about lunch orders. In the group chat that used to be silly and full of gifs, the thread now had a single message from someone I'd never guessed would be the one to say the worst thing: "It's everywhere." That was the sort of phrase that moves in packs and arrives as if a storm front. My landlord left a note that teetered between solicitous and menacing, the kind of voicemail people use when they want to say, politely, that consequences are real. "Hey, Maya. Look, I know things come up. If this is going to be longer than a couple weeks, we should, I just want to be proactive about the rent." He cleared his throat. "If you can't make this month's, we might need to talk about arrangements. I don't want to make this harder on you, but I do need to know." No accusation, only business-like threat. I imagined the ledger in his head: late fee, notice, next tenant. The thread of my life that connected to rent and lights and heat felt suddenly as flimsy as a hobby seam. And then the bank text, crisp and merciless: "Alert, account activity suspended pending employer verification. Call 1-800-XXXX. Payroll flagged." I called. A recording told me for privacy and security reasons they couldn't discuss specifics without employer authorization. The bank had frozen my funds because payroll processing had been flagged by my employer. Somebody had pushed a button and turned off the water. I sat down hard on a kitchen chair that seemed too upright for a body that wanted to lie down and blot everything out. Small things began to diffuse into explosions. The light bulb in the hallway glitched and I felt like the building was closing its eyes on me. A plate slid from the edge of the sink and shattered into hairline lightning and I sobbed because it was an object obeying gravity and I wasn't. I laughed at myself for laughing and it sounded like a cry. My hands shook when I dialed numbers that sent me to hold music in a corporate wall of responses, polite voices that duplicated themselves and ran out of questions. Sophie texted a photo of the two of us on a ferry from last summer, us, windblown, grinning at something neither of us could remember now except that we were happy, and then, minutes later, a single line, "I don't know how to do this." The absence in her messages was a third person in the room, a blank space that filled up with cold air. Friends who'd been my emergency contact for everything became, I don't know what. Rachel sent a thumbs-up emoji that landed like a stone. Tess didn't answer. Benny sent messages that read like he was shoving against a locked door, "I'll try to pull logs from outside the corporate network. Can't promise." There was love in his clipped, pragmatic tone, but also the weight of handheld rules and legalese between us. Somewhere in the background a neighbor radioed a subway joke like a talisman, the city's grim way of saying life went on, "At least it's not the 4 train," someone said in a stairwell. The joke should have helped. Instead it hit me like a taunt. I'd spent 5 years building a life that was neat enough to be admired at office parties. Now, every neat line blurred. And then my phone buzzed with a name that made my stomach drop, Nora Vance. Local blogger, teeth for headlines. The preview read, "Got a minute? Writing a piece on an office scandal. Link? Do you want to comment?" I opened it and felt something like the bottom falling out of my chest. If Whispers became a column, the version of me living in the carefully edited frames of my apartment would tilt toward the edges. If she wrote it, everyone I'd ever known would get a push notification that morning. I hadn't yet decided whether to scream or to sleep. My voicemail blinked with my parents' worry, my landlord's thin patience, the bank's vanishing act, Sophie's retreat. The apartment hummed with the ordinary sounds of a life that didn't feel like mine anymore. I thumbed a reply to Nora and then deleted it. My thumb hovered over the screen. The phone felt heavy and alive, like a heart that was deciding something I couldn't control. I was 3 sips into cold coffee and trying to convince my hands that keyboards are not weapons when the leak landed in my inbox, a forwarded internal thread, subject line trimmed to FY, leadership. The sender was anonymous, somebody who'd been hoarding receipts, and the attachment was a screen grab of a Slack DM. The building's fluorescent hum sharpened into a background hiss. My phone felt suddenly heavy in my palm, like a stone. The thread read like a roasting at a funeral. Someone at the top had forwarded the screenshot we've all seen in varying qualities, a message I can't load on my own phone, with the little annotator comment, "Check out her tone." The tone. As if politeness and syntax were terminal offenses. Under that, a terse reply from Stephen Calder, the man who'd been most visibly cool toward my promotion all year, "We can't have this around a client dinner." Short. Precise. Like a scalpel. No punctuation to soften it. I read those 2 lines 3 times before my brain would permit the rest. The cadence of corporate cruelty slammed into me, problem identified, scapegoat chosen, risk management enacted. Client dinner. Code for optics. Code for inconvenience. Code for not our problem, but we'll pretend it is. For 5 years I'd learned to hear that cadence, warm at first, then the blade, Elena knows it well enough to polish it. But seeing it in black and white, not in the withheld face of a meeting room, made it look deliberate. Strategic. My mouth tasted like pennies. The corner of the paper cup scraped the toothbrush of my thumb. I hadn't realized I was gripping it until the rim folded. I scrolled. Another reply, from Harold the security guy, short, understated, escort done. A tiny checkmark of completion. Ben's name didn't show, he'd been stonewalled by IT's chain of custody. Marco had forwarded nothing but a polite, corporate we take allegations seriously memo. Elena's tone in the thread was brittle with professional concern, protective, if only in the way people protect themselves. And then, halfway down, buried like a liar's confession, was a duplicate image. The thumbnail sat there, almost missed, the way a tooth will hide behind a lip. I clicked it the way you click a dead fly. The full image opened. The message was the same sentence, the same timestamp, or so I thought until I looked closer at the profile bubble. The username on the duplicate was the same first name as mine, Maya. But the last name wasn't Alvarez. Maya Chen. Maya Patel. I blinked. Whoever had forwarded this had swapped the screenshot for one that showed a different last name. Or maybe the screenshot had always been of someone else. Maybe all of it, my suspension, Elena's tight jaw, Marco's practiced lines, were built on a mislabeling so specific it felt like a professional's touch. I have gaps in my memory. I have gentlemanly blackouts that leave me apologizing later and trying to stitch together steps like a slow, negligent seamstress. The difference here was that the gap was not in my head, it had been fabricated elsewhere. The company had a screenshot. The company had acted. The company had acted on a thing that might not have been mine. Guys, did anyone actually check whether this is Maya A? Someone had written in the thread, except it was phrased as a joke and the line was buried among the snide replies. Beneath that, someone else had posted an image of the screenshot with the file name visible for half a beat, img_0219_mayachen.png. The file name might be a forgotten artifact of how images get moved, saved, mislabeled. Or it might be the breadcrumb that turned the whole thing into a trap. The more deliberate the misattribution, the more dangerous the implication, not an unfortunate mistake, but a weaponized mistake. I felt the air press in around my ears. My apartment hummed in memory, one of those I can usually rely on, the exact way the stairwell light stings, the smell of the building's antiseptic on wet floors, but now memory and metadata were fighting. Either I had been careless and the company had been clumsy, or somebody in the company had been careful and I was the intended casualty. Stephen's line, "We can't have this around a client dinner," suddenly read like confirmation, not just of managerial panic but of motive. Client dinners are calendar events that translate into revenue and, more importantly, away from the messy accountability of HR processes. If someone wanted me off the promotion list, if someone wanted the awkwardness of a high-performing, occasionally tipsy, occasionally text-messaged woman out of their way, one well-placed image could do it. All you needed was a plausible name and a timing that looked like coincidence. I scrolled back up to the top of the thread and started mapping names to reactions the way I used to map campaign metrics: who replied fast, who paused, who asked a question and then dropped it. Elena posted a heart emoji and then a directive to handle this quietly. Marco had forwarded the screenshot to HR with a one-line summary and a timestamp. Harold confirmed the escort. Somewhere between the shuttle of the Slack responses and the mechanical certainty with which my box of things had been cleared from my desk, I could feel a pattern being traced. The image file, when I hovered over it, revealed more metadata, a timestamp, a GPS coordinate that landed not on my phone log but in the vicinity of the office bar 2 blocks down. The burner SIM Armin had flagged? The time matched the 2:12 a.m. log Ben had found earlier. Whoever had sent that message, or whoever had mirrored it, had done it from a spot that made it easy to say, with a straight face, it came from inside our ecosystem. If the screenshot was of a different Maya, if someone had deliberately swapped Alvarez for Chen or Patel in a public-facing file name, that opened a line of inquiry that pulled at more than HR policy. It pulled at motive and method and the people who benefited. It pulled at Stephen's calendar and his silent opposition to my promotion. It pulled at Elena's sudden, protective posture that had a habit of shifting when it needed to be politically expedient. I made myself a list, the way I always do when I need to make a plan that looks like a map. Names. Times. File names. Who responded fastest? Who gained something when I didn't get the title? I took a screenshot of the screenshot, because in our world, the best evidence is what you can hold to a light, and I sent it to Armin with 3 words, "Who is Maya Chen?" His reply came faster than I expected. Short, no exclamation, no reassurance, someone made a copy of her. I found her because tracking a duped account is about as glamorous as digging through recycling for receipts, sticky, methodical, a little humiliating. The duplicate came back to a number that pinged off a freestanding desk 3 seats down from mine for 6 weeks. 3 desks down, the horizontal space where you can overhear someone's Spotify, where someone borrows a stapler and leaves their plant dying. Tess used to sit there. Tess used to be part of the background until she wasn't. She picked the lull hour at the coffee shop on 9th, the one with the perpetually burnt roast and a barista who called everyone, love, and meant it exactly as little as the office meant my promotion. The lighting made her skin look raw. She was wearing the same cardigan she'd had at the firm, a pilled navy thing that smelled faintly of cheap detergent and the office microwave stewers. Her mascara had been a watercolor exercise in panic. She looked like someone who had been trying to scrub a bruise off her face and realized bruises don't come off that easily. I sat down across from her and ordered black coffee because decisions feel better when they're bitter and uncomplicated. She didn't order. She kept twisting a paper sleeve in her fingers until it ripped. "Thanks for meeting me," I said, which was the most corporate thing I'd said all week. She flinched like I'd used a full stop instead of a question mark. She wouldn't look at me. Instead, she watched the rain make little rivers down the window, the city looking more candid as the sky leaked. She had a tenderness to her that made me want to tackle her into a hug and then immediately file a restraint order. My brain does that, wants to fix then litigate. "Why did you forward the messages?" I asked. Not gentle. Not because I have any right to be gentle, because it needed to be the question with the fastest possible answer. My mouth said it like I was giving an elevator pitch. She swallowed. Her Adam's apple did that quick, frightened hop that people do when they're deciding between lying and crying. She made a sound that was part apology, part choke. "I didn't want to," she said. The words came out tiny. They paid me. There are confessions and then there are confessions. The kind you can file under, the obvious, finally confirmed. The barista called out an espresso order. The playlist moved on to something acoustic, which was the universe's way of adding insult to injury. Who? It came out sharp because I'd practiced it all night. My memory has gaps, it's a hole in my narrative that I try to stitch with facts, and who is the thread. Tess laughed then, a short dry thing that might have been a release. "Do you know how much a temp makes?" You don't think they'd come into the office with a check and hand it to me. It was cash. Envelope. Left in my locker. No note. No name. She kept her voice small, as if sound might be a weapon in this place. "How much?" I asked. "Enough." She blinked hard. 500. Maybe 7. I don't remember. It was a lot for me. She looked like she was cataloging reasons to be ashamed. They told me to forward anything that would cause trouble and then delete it. They said it'd blow over fast. That was it. They said it would help them, help their side. Her mouth moved around the words but her eyes stayed on the rain. She had been paid to forward messages. Paid to be a conduit. Paid to make me the story. Who told you to do it? Who put cash in your locker? I pushed. Not as a prosecutor but because facts are a scaffolding for sanity. She shook her head. A brittle motion. No names. I wasn't supposed to even know. Her fingers finally stopped trembling enough to uncap a pen and shuffle a napkin. On the napkin she'd scribbled something and then folded it into a scrap like a confession note. She didn't give it to me. There is a moment in every interrogation where you think if you just tilt the light right, the truth will be more visible. I leaned in. The smell of burnt coffee filled my nostrils. My pulse was a nervous metronome. I tried to organize the next steps like a checklist: who, when, how, proof. She lifted her head then, and for a second she looked 14. "I'm so sorry," she said. "I didn't want this to happen to you." They said, she swallowed, and whatever she was about to say got swallowed with it. She kept clamping down on her fists like she might smother the whole thing. Then she did something that made me feel both stupid and furious. She shoved her phone across the table. I thought she was sliding it because she's a millennial and that's how you mean business now, but the screen was lit and there was a single message visible against a gray bubble. I read it before her hands stopped trembling entirely. "Don't dig or they'll come for you next." It's a sentence that sits like a weight, small and implacable. Not a threat with a face, just a ledger entry of menace. I could imagine the originator of that text, careful, patient, surgical. Someone who understood escalation. Someone who knew how to weaponize fear. Someone who thought fear could substitute for a paper trail. I should have done the sensible things in that moment, called the cops, put the phone down and taken a breath, archived, escalated, counsel. Instead I felt the old peripheral of who I am, the person who notices patterns, who hates being trapped in narratives written by other people. My fingers hovered near the glass like a professional who could not keep from touching the evidence. Before I could ask where the message had come from, before I could process that Tess had been paid and that the payment could redirect an entire investigation, she said the thing that made the room tilt. I didn't want to get involved, she whispered. They said if I told anyone they'd, her voice broke. She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't need to. Outside, a delivery truck hissed to a stop. Inside, a kid with a man bun asked for an oat latte and got it reluctantly. The everyday sounds leaned toward me with that particular cruelty that makes conspiracy feel real, mundanity as backdrop to malice. Who are they? I asked, because the word, they, is a map of power and I wanted the map. Tess looked at me, finally meeting my eyes with a pair of pupils that had been hollowed out by fear. I told you. No names, she said. But they know people. They said this would make me useful. They said they'd cut me out after. They said to be quiet. Her voice was a thread and it was fraying fast. I thought of Elena's clipped concern at the suspension meeting, of Marco's corporate script, of Stephen with his clean hands and colder smile. I thought of Harold's understated witness and how witnesses get moved or silenced. The list formed like a bruise. I slid the phone back toward her because there was nothing else to do with it. It landed on the table like a verdict. Don't dig, Tess said. That's what the message said. They meant it. Being told not to do something is a fine way to test whether you will do it. There's that grammar about human nature, forbid a thing and someone will start thinking in terms of angles and alibis. I can't not, I said. It felt like telling someone my blood type. Honest and unavoidable. She made a small, terrified laugh that had no humor in it. Please, she said. Please, Maya. I did this because I'm afraid. I don't want them coming after me too. I wanted to promise her protection and file a lawsuit and call Priya right then and there. I wanted to be the grown-up with a plan. I wanted to be sure. Instead, I put my coffee down, tasted the scorched finish, and remembered the parking notice on my door. Rent. HR's deadline. The fog that's lived in the back of my skull for years, the gaps I don't like to name. Okay, I said, which was not okay at all. Tell me everything. She began, and somewhere in the middle of what should have been fixing everything, the city leaned in and the world stayed quiet enough that the thread on her screen felt like proof not of cowardice, but of intent. The settlement offer looked like a ransom note written by someone who believed in euphemisms. 2 weeks' pay, a severance letter, a non-disparagement clause so thorough it would have outlawed sneezing in the direction of the company. Priya called it expedient. Elena called it a way forward. Marco called it standard procedure. Sophie called it what's best if we want to survive. The landlord called me to apologize in a way that sounded like an eviction notice, and my bank quietly labeled a bunch of transactions suspicious and froze a card. I drank burnt coffee on my couch like it was a performance piece about bad decisions. The mug left a crescent of bitterness on my tongue and a fingerprint of guilt on the rim of my apartment, my life reduced to little stains. The apartment had started to smell like late nights and copies of screenshots. The city outside, immutable, kept no score. Priya's voicemail from the hallway between the kitchen and the roofline of my anxiety was careful and short. Litigation was a meat grinder. Discovery would tear up personal devices, financials, and if Stephen Calder wanted to make my life a case study in corporate containment, he could. The firm would litigate until I crumbled. Or until I did. Winning could mean years of money in lawyers' retainer fees, time away from bills, and a legal record that made me as undesirable as the accusation had. Settling meant silence, a clean severance, and the ability to stop waking up with names running through my mind like bad subway jokes. Except settling would sign away more than my right to sue. It would seal the version of events they'd written, a screenshot with my name, a forwarded message from a terrified temp who admitted she'd been paid to send it, and a mirrored account that Armin traced to a burner SIM pinging near the office at 2:12 a.m. The logs pointed to manipulation. Tessa's confession, sitting across from me in a cafe with mascara still wet on her cheeks, had the heft of a breaking hinge. They paid me to forward it, she'd whispered. They said it would make things move. Her hands shook so hard the paper slid. Benny wanted me to hire a detective. He sat across from me with a bowl of curly fries and a directness I'd trusted since grade school. We can pull more logs, he said. We can follow money. But HR can stonewall faster than you can breathe. Armin's report had given us a lever, proxy IPs, a pattern of duplicated numbers, but not a smoking gun that would survive the firm's legal firewall. Priya's face went flat when I asked about subpoenas. You can get data, she said, but only after you commit to a discovery process that the company could weaponize to bury me in paperwork and counterclaims. And then there was Sophie. I thought she'd be my sanctum. Instead she became a mirror that reflected fear back at me. She helped pack the moving boxes and typed, with hands that wouldn't meet mine, the careful words of support that stopped 2 inches short of conviction. Love, it turns out, is easier when it's quiet and still suspected. When the accusation became a live thing that could burn careers, she retreated into caution the way a cat retreats into shadows. I can't blame her entirely. This is how people survive. So I sat with the settlement in one hand and a draft of a public post in the other. Priya's do not list hovered like a shark fin, do not go public, do not name, do not post screenshots that aren't for legal production, do not give fuel to the blogosphere. Nora Vance was already circling with the eagerness of a crow. Any comment? Her email had said, every line a small trap. I thought about the temp room at work where Rachel had grown quiet when I asked her what she'd seen. She had looked like someone who'd just been taught to lie and decided the class was worth attending. I thought about the internal thread someone leaked where a senior exec joked about moving the client dinner, a comment that reeked of the very political cut I'd feared. I thought about the burner SIM ping near the office at 2:12 a.m., about Tessa's terrified confession, about the anonymous text I'd received the first night, "Stop looking," that thudded in my chest like a warning bell with no clear origin. The stupid, exact thing that pushed me over was this: if I signed the settlement, the narrative would ossify. The company's version would become the public record, and my gaps of memory, those shameful, brittle things I'd been hiding, would be the fuel used to say I was an unreliable narrator. Someone, somewhere, had exploited the fact that I don't remember everything. I knew how that story ends for women who don't remember, guilty until proven otherwise in the court of whispers. So I did something Priya and Marco and Elena would tell me was reckless. I started to document. Not with an overproduced press release or a lawyer-approved statement, but in the grainy, human way people get hurt online, a public thread, time-stamped, honest. One post to start, just me, the facts as I had them, what I knew and what I didn't, and the names of the people who had admitted to things on the record. I uploaded images of logs Armin had redacted but whose metadata I could show without breaking lawyerly rules. I described the smell of burnt coffee the morning they escorted me out, the way Harold the security guard avoided my eye, the exact time my bank froze a card. I typed in the gaps, I don't remember an hour between leaving the bar and getting home, because shame got less sharp when it lived in the light. I kept each sentence short. I promised myself, one honest post at a time. Priya called. You don't have to do this, she said, and there was real fear in her voice, not corporate concern, but the worry of someone who knew exactly how badly the system can eviscerate you. You will be a story, she warned. You will lose more than money. I clicked publish. The apartment was silent in that not quite safe way a room is right before someone knocks. My phone had been face down on the table, Sophie's cushion of quiet, and for a beat the city intruded with its regularities, a subway door slam, a neighbor's late laugh, the hiss of steam from the radiator. As the post went live, my phone lit up. Unknown number. No country code. No name. It read, you should have let it die. I felt, somewhere behind the part of me that had prepared evidence and plotted timelines, a very human, very old fear, that speaking up would not end anything, but rather start something enormous and dangerous. My thumb hovered over the screen like a hand over a match. I hit reply. The message bubble stayed gray for a second that felt like a small eternity. Then dots, type, then nothing. I am not done. The post was up, so was the threat. The fight, it seemed, had accepted my RSVP.